I were to go to your house or the place that you live today, how many of you would have an object, an article of clothing, some possession, that when you saw it, it just would make no sense as to why you had it still? Once upon a time, it served its purpose, but seeing it now, today, you would ask yourself, why is this still around? So I thought if I asked you, I would have to be honest about it myself and show you a few things this week that I found. Relax, relax. We do have ushers for hecklers. So I found this. This was one thing. Now, once upon a time, my son Eli wore this. My son Eli is 18 years old. This was what he wore when he was 12. I looked at it and I just thought, a lot of great memories, maybe for keepsake, but how many things can you hold on to and yet have one house? You know? So I just thought, this probably has outlived its purpose in our lives. It probably needs to go. And then, and I know I'm not alone in this, I found this. And judging by the color on the side, we haven't used this color in probably a decade in our house. I know some of you, if we were to look at your house, we would probably find at least one or more of these, would we not? The paint has hardened, people. It's time to get rid of it. I'm not going to throw this one, but I would say it has outlived its purpose. A couple more. How many of you know this game, Othello? Now, I used to love this game. It's a great game, but the problem is you have pieces that are white on one side and black on the other. And when you start to lose these pieces, if you don't have enough, you can't play the game. So when you start taking pieces of paper and coloring with black magic marker on one side and white on the other, or finding rocks that were dark or rocks that were white to play the game, it's probably time to either get a new Othello or just trash it. And that's where we are with that one. So, that has paint on the front of it. My favorite, and lastly, are these. Now these, if you can't make them out, were once upon a time high-end slippers, despite what my wife may say. Now I know that you look at these slippers and you say, they look like junk to me. But one man's junk is another man's treasure. When I first bought these slippers, it felt like when I put them on that I was walking on sunshine. Like I strapped pillows to the bottom of my feet and I was just walking around, and it felt great. It didn't matter that I looked a bit like an idiot. They felt great. And then my dog, as you can see, got a hold of my slippers. I wasn't very happy. But when I wore them, any moisture or anything on my floor began to make my socks and my feet wet and dirty, and they no longer were serving their purpose, but I kept them around anyway, because one day I discovered that every time I watched the Patriots play and were wearing these, the Patriots won. It has nothing to do with how good their team was or how well they were coached. It just had to do with whether I was wearing these when they were playing. Some of you think I'm an idiot, and you may be well right. Others of you have articles of clothing that you do the same with, don't you? At some point in time, whether it's our broken games or our paint cans that have hardened or our mementos or our slippers, at some point in time it just doesn't make any sense to hold on to stuff that once served us but no longer serves us the way it once did. We're in a series, it's a two-part series, this is week 2, and we're looking at and thinking about what does it mean to have a better story? What would it look like in 2020 for me to write chapters that as I move through my life would be the kind of story that I want to live into? And as we think about what that would mean for us, I want us today to just be honest. Because when you're crafting a story, especially a personal story, there is a bit of searching and fearless moral inventory that has to take place. If we're going to write a better chapter, we have to see the chapters that we're in and have come out of to understand what it is that we want to do differently. And if we're not honest with ourselves, if we won't see it, if we won't acknowledge it, chances are good we're just going to keep writing the same thing over and over and over. And so, as we're getting started today, I have a couple of questions for you. A couple of questions of a more serious nature. Number one, what are you holding on to that's holding you back? What are you clinging to that's slowing you down? What are you holding on to that's holding you back? And what are you clinging to that's slowing you or keeping you down? Once upon a time, we engaged a relationship and there was a conflict. And these days, it's difficult to remember how the conflict even started, but for a time, we felt right in the stance that we took. Now, all we feel is isolation. Now all we feel is the brokenness of that relationship. Sometimes we hold on to a need to be right at the expense of the health of a relationship. What are you holding on to today that's holding you back? What are you holding on to? Is it a righteous anger? Something that you feel justified in being angry about, and yet all it continues to do as it takes up residence in you is eat away at your soul? Is it a sadness that found its way in, maybe as a result of a deep loss or some great failure, some sadness that entered your world and it took up residence and it made a home in you and it's holding you back and it's keeping you down? I don't know what it is, but I think the question is worth considering as you think about writing a new chapter for your story. What is it that is holding you back? What is it that is keeping you down? And why? It's a simple question, not always easy to answer. I mean, it's not always easy to answer why I've held on to slippers and helmets and games, much less anger and fear and anxiety and sadness. All of us want a better life, but there are things in our lives that are keeping us from that, things that have mastery over us. And I just want to ask you, is there something in your life that has mastery over you that's keeping you from your best life? And if it's taken up residence, if it's holding on to you or you're holding on to it, I just have to ask you why. And then once you come to terms with what it is and why, then I just have to ask you, is it worth it? Is it worth it? Because all of us want to be better, but being better doesn't just happen. We don't stumble into goodness or greatness. There has to be intention. We have to look at our lives, listen to our lives, pay attention to the places where we have fallen down and where we are stuck if we are to deal with the things that we most need for rescue and for relief and for redemption. What are you holding on to that's holding you back? What has mastery in your life? And why are you still holding on? The Apostle Paul put it like this in Romans chapter 6. You know, Nevaeh read this earlier, but I want to say it again. He says, don't you realize? It's almost like he's asking this question that we should all know, but we don't. He says, don't you realize that you become the slave of whatever you choose to obey? Don't you realize? Don't you get that whatever you choose to obey, whatever you give mastery, whatever you cling to, whatever you're holding on to that's no longer serving you well, don't you understand that you are a slave to that? That you have given up your power, that you have given up your personhood, your control? Don't you know? And he says you can either be a slave to sin, which leads to death. You can either be a slave to sin, which leads to death, or you can choose to obey God, which leads to righteous living. In whatever form it takes, sin leads to death. Now the question is, well, what is sin? You know, over the years I have even given illustration about how the Bible looks at the concept of sin. It's the idea of there's this bullseye, there's this target, and there's this archer, and he's shooting for the target. But when he shoots, he misses. Now he may miss by an inch, or he may miss the target altogether, but the idea is that the person, the archer who is shooting the arrow, is missing the target. But I want to unpack just a little bit more, because as it relates to this text, I think it's important that we know. I think sometimes when we're living our lives, we can live in denial of the things that are going on in our lives, and we can justify and we can make excuse for. But let me just be very simple. You don't even need a list. Like, this is not something where I'm going to define it in such a way that it's going to be like some mystery, or you don't need a list of things that are good or bad, right or wrong. Sin is anything that hurts you or someone else. Sin is anything that takes away at the goodness and greatness of who you were made to be, and in relationship with one another. Sin destroys our lives. It wrecks our peace. It takes away from the beauty and the wonder and the marvel that is you and me. Created in the image of God, we were created for greatness. Sin is anything that damages that's hurtful or harmful to us individually or in relationship with one another. So it's a very easy way to just check and say, is this wrong? Should this be or not be in my life? I would just simply ask you, is it causing harm? Is it crushing peace? Is it taking away from the best part of who you are? And if the answer is yes, then you know it is sin. Now, why is God so opposed to sin? Sometimes we can moralize this concept, right? And we can make it out that people who do X, Y, or Z things, they are sinful or sinners, and even sometimes slip into the category of thinking they're bad. I think when we go in that direction, it's movement in a wrong direction. All of us have the great capacity for good and for evil. And in a given day, we may contribute to both. Those things may well be at play in our lives. The issue isn't, is there sin in our life? The issue is, why? Why would there be? And God is so strongly opposed to sin because it hurts those He loves the most. It hurts His creation in His image. And so when the Apostle Paul is talking about this, he basically says, whatever you allow to have mastery over you will have its way. He said the problem with sin is when you allow sin into your world, into your life, it's going to lead you to death. It's going to lead you away from the life that I created you for. And so Paul would say, don't you realize you have another master who offered his life for you, who loves you with such an everlasting and fierce love that there is nothing that He wouldn't do to free you from the power of sin? And when you have one master, you don't need another. And yet there are things in our lives that we're holding on to that has a greater hold on us than we would like to admit. And I just have to ask the question, why? Why would we allow unchecked anger? Why would we allow anxiety and fear? Why would we allow our prejudices and our biases and our negativity and our cynicism? Why would we allow these things to have mastery over us? We already have a master. A master who leads us to life and to light. Who in His image created us for greater things. I just want to say to you this morning, this is a simple invitation. It may not seem so easy. It may seem a little more complicated, but I just want to say to you, if you can identify what is in your house that doesn't belong, it's time to just let it go. Once upon a time, you may have understood its purpose or its reason for being, but it just no longer makes sense for it to be there. And at some point, if you don't let it go, it's going to kill your soul. And why would you let it do that? You were made for more. So I want you, as we're thinking about our lives and we're thinking about writing better chapters in our story, I really want you to do a searching and fearless moral inventory, and I want you to look at your life, and I just want you to consider what belongs and what doesn't. And then when you identify those things that don't, that you would have the courage to just let it go or take it out and just put it in the garbage. It no longer needs to occupy the space that it does in your life. Paul says, don't you know that you become the slave of whatever you choose to obey? And then he says, if you obey Christ and His ways, His new patterns of living, what you will find is that you have freedom, and that you will move into the best part of who He made you to be, righteous living. That when people look at you and they see your life, they will see better. And you will see better, and you will know that you're free. You're free to be your best self. But all of us are not free. And I just think today is January 12th, but maybe it's July 4th. Maybe it's Independence Day. Maybe it's just time for you to let go. Anything that has mastery over you, that is trapping you, holding you down, pushing you back, it's not good for you. The only master in this analogy you want is one who is going to sacrifice for you so that you can be liberated to be your best self. I want you to write a better story this year. For your sake, for our sake, for God's sake. When each of us write a better story, it's a better world. And I just want to live in a better world. And you can contribute to that, and so can I. And so part of doing that is just being honest. And it's not so easy to be honest always. It really isn't, because there's a lot of reasons why we're not. But for this day, with a commitment to be better, it's time for us to be honest. And as we're honest, it's time for us to let go. Because we can't take hold of something that is good if we're holding on to something that's killing us. And whatever form it takes, our sin is killing us, and it grieves the heart of God, and He just wants us to let it go so that He can give us something better. And that's what He wants, and that's what I want, and I'm sure it's what you want. So why not today? Today, let's write a new chapter. Independence Day. Let's pray. Lord, much like we would go through our house and look for what needs to be eliminated with our spring cleanings, I pray that you would give us the courage to look at our personal house and see what needs to go. There might have been a time where we felt justified in holding on to some of the things that we did. Maybe it protected us from being hurt again, or maybe it was just the fact that we experienced deep loss and we just didn't know how to navigate it. And before we knew it, it colored our world. And now we've just been depressed for years and we just don't know how to move forward. Whatever it is that we're holding on to that has mastery over us, if it's not leading us to life, would you help us to see it and then have the courage to let it go and receive your best for us this day and in the days to come. In Christ we pray. Amen.